So that's done. So to begin with, can you just introduce yourself, who you are, and what do you do?
My name is Greg McPartlin. I was born and raised here in Detroit, Michigan. Spent most of my life here. I went out on a journey after college and traveled around the world for about 4 years, always knowing I was going to come back home to Detroit. I always felt, Detroit was my home. So I spent 4 years in about 52 countries, traveling the world, really learning and focusing on water and the effects of water and the issues that water have in specific parts of the world, and how do we solve our world water problems. And I took that knowledge and that network and came back here to Detroit because I believe Detroit is the epicenter for innovation, the epicenter for technology. So many things started here. The automobile, right? The stoplight, right? There's so much innovation here and there's so much opportunity. So that's why I came back here to be focused on water and innovation and help solving the world's water problems. Because over the next 100 years, water is going to be the new gold, right? And everybody who has the gold, we do. Michigan, we have the gold. We have 22% of the world's fresh water, right? And unfortunately, we've been taking it for granted. So, how can we create that shift in thinking? And how do we enable and inspire people to stop taking it for granted, right? And start treating it as their greatest asset? And how do we inspire the thought leaders, right, of the future to be able to say, when people come for our water, right, we have these packs and we have all these other things that protect our water. Packs and no signatures matter when somebody wants water and they don't have it, right? There will be wars, right? There will be famines, there will be death. When people come to Michigan demanding our water, I want to be ready and to have the thought leaders ready and in place and educated and say, no, don't take our water. Let us just teach you how to better manage your own water.
So Greg, I'm going to ask you a little bit about water security and insecurity. What does that mean for you, and especially in the context of a city like Detroit?
I believe through the history of time, water has been used as a weapon against the poor. All major cities around the world were founded because of water and access to water and water supply, right? Constantinople, right? Jakarta, right? Paris. All cities in the United States, all major cities are on a major water source. There's only two, Indianapolis and Denver. They're the only two outliers, right? So water is the key component for community development, economic development. That's the building block. And I feel for years that water has been used as a weapon against the poor, right? And it hasn't the value what it means to, we'll say, the economically advantaged and the economically disadvantaged, right? When you're economically disadvantaged and you don't have access to that clean water, right? And you're sick and your brain's not functioning fully, you don't have the capacity to learn. So it's used as a weapon to keep the economically disadvantaged in the position where they're at. And until we address, right, education's important. I went into my kids' class and I asked the class, and the teachers were not very excited about it. I said, what's more important, your teacher or this bottle of water, clean water? And everybody said, oh, my teacher. I said, it doesn't matter how good your teacher is. If you don't have clean water, you don't have the capacity to learn.
I think what you said right now, that water has been historically used as a weapon against the power, is a very profound and also powerful thing to say. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more, especially when you look around you in the context of Detroit and other cities like us? How do you see water being used or serving to further oppress? low-income communities?
I like to put it this way, kind of an analogy, right? The and nobody realizes this, right? It's one of those things that are so in front of everyone, but nobody notices. The highest lying properties, the highest lying lands, is where the economically advantaged live. The economically disadvantaged live in the lower lying properties. The highest point, the highest area in Detroit is Indian Village, right? This once again is a global thing. This happened all over the world. And so where did they invest in infrastructure, right? Where did they invest in sewers? Where did they invest in stormwater management? Where did they put their money and their resources? In the high-lying areas that actually needed that infrastructure less than the low-lying areas. Now, the economically disadvantaged are in those low-lying areas, right? And guess what? Insurance for flooding and those other issues is exponentially greater, if not available at all, to the consumer. In the economically advantaged areas, right, if they get a flood, no big deal. $5,000 warranty or $5,000 liability, for insurance. They come in, clean up your basement, you call it a day. It's extremely expensive to be poor in Detroit or anywhere in the world. And people don't understand that. It's extremely, extremely expensive. Now, when that economically disadvantaged person gets that flood in their basement, right, they don't have the insurance, right? Now, they can't clean it out properly. What are the effects? Their kids get sick, right? They have lung problems, right? They have breathing problems. And now you have a job that you're working 9 to 5, or you're having 2 jobs or 3 jobs. And guess what? You got to miss the job. Now all of a sudden you lose your job. And now you lose your health insurance, right? It's that cyclical effect, right? It's only, they're only one strike away, right? They don't have that infrastructure and that security. And water is just one more building block, right, that is used against them to keep them where they're at today.
Tell me a little bit about your career. As you said, you traveled to 54 cities?
54 or 52 countries.
52 countries.
Right. If you consider Scotland and Wales separate countries, which I do, even though they're part of the United Kingdom, but that's a whole other issue.
Technically, they are actually separate countries.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about your work so far and your career so far in terms of what you've learned and what you've done.
Well, I went to Western Michigan University for my undergrad. Then I got involved with a few business ventures, and I wanted to go back to graduate school. I did some international travel, but I really wanted to explore and see the world more, right? I had a favorite book called The Alchemist, right? And it was about a shepherd who went out and saw the world, right? Exactly. And what did he do? He brought all of those lessons. He learned all those things from all over the world, right? And he brought them back to his home, right? Because that's where his fantasy world was. He thought it was out there in the rest of the world, but he went to see the rest of the world and learn those lessons. And where it was really at was home. But you have to go and you have to leave and you have to see the world to really appreciate what you do have. And that's why I left, and I was gone for almost 12 years altogether, but I spent about 4 years internationally. About 18 months in Australia. I did a graduate degree in, I did a master's in business administration and international business. And from that, I was able to do 3 separate around the world trips. And I asked myself then, I saw a movie, and you won't know it because you're too young, but I bet you guys know the movie The Graduate.
Yeah.
Right, and there's the most powerful line in there. The most powerful line is when he came up to the graduate and he says, "It's all about plastics," right? Remember the line? It's all about plastics. And so I said, oh man, I wish somebody would tell me what it's all about. So I really started pondering on that. And I said, it's all about water. It's all about water. Water is our next gold, right? Water has the least amount of innovation in the marketplace and the greatest market growth, greatest market opportunity, and also the least amount of innovation, thus the greatest opportunity. So I spent the last nearly 20 years, going on 20 years now, focused on water and innovation and identifying water innovation technologies to help address different things from oxygenation, right? You can't have clean water with oxygen. And you can have water, H2O, but you have to have dissolved oxygen. Fish breathe oxygen. They don't breathe water, right? And if they don't have dissolved oxygen, they die. So I was involved with a oxygenation company. How do you combine water and oxygen together on a molecular level, cost effectively, right? Desalination, oil water separation, different technologies, right? And they all have immense challenges, right? There's very little risk in the water market. Everybody's afraid of taking risk in the water market. So I said, how do you break those barriers, right? How do you make it easier for the next guy? I don't want to make it easy, but I don't want anyone to suffer what I've had to suffer when you have a beautiful, wonderful technology in a sector that works and it's proven, but people are just risk adverse, right? I call it the valley of death. You have your innovator here, right? And here's the other side. How do you get through that valley of death? How do you survive that battle to get to the other side? Because the innovations exist to solve our world water problems. They exist today. They're in the market. But the problem is the people's willingness to adopt those technologies. And how do you create processes and procedures to inspire risk-taking, to focus on failing? Failing is a good thing, right? How do you inspire people to fail and fail quickly, right? To ask questions of, not instead of focusing on why not do something, right? But what if it worked? What if? And how do you find quickly if it works or not so you can move on to the next thing, right? Thomas Edison, what was it, 10,000 light bulbs, right? He failed 10,000 times. He wasn't afraid to fail. So how do you do that? And through that, through that process and building the network of people and thought leaders in the marketplace, how do you create, everybody's working in silos, right? Everybody's out for their own interest and what's best for them. And how do you break down those silos? And how do you get everybody to work together, right, for one purpose? Because if we don't solve our water problems, nothing else matters. Nothing matters if we don't solve water, right?
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how you see the water innovation space here in Detroit. Milwaukee, for instance, is very well known as far as water innovation technology is concerned and things like that. Detroit has perhaps not quite so well known as much, but maybe I'm missing something. So
Yep.
what's
Well,
the
I think there's a
scope of the
little
space
bit of
right
we're giving
now?
Detroit a little too much credit,
Okay.
where we're really far behind.
Yeah.
We're really far behind. So it's not a marginal difference of where we're at. Really, the leaders are Milwaukee, who's doing a great job in regards to water innovation. But they're mostly focused on attracting existing companies, right? And who's actually doing the best job, from my opinion, is the Cleveland Water Alliance down in Cleveland. Cleveland is doing great work.
Israel is great too.
Well, Israel. Now, the leaders globally, right? The Dutch, Israel, and Singapore. Why? Why are they the leaders? Because humanity and people don't react unless they're threatened, right? They were threatened, right? They had to be the leaders, right? They had a gun to their head. They didn't have water, so they had to innovate. What would happen if the Netherlands didn't become the thought leaders in water and water innovation? They would have sunk, right? They would have been buried. They're below sea level. Israel, peace in the Middle East. They're not fighting over land, right? Land's a byproduct. They're fighting over water, right? They're fighting over the land with water. So it's the framing of the discussion. Everybody talks about land. Nothing to do with land, right? It's all about the land with the water, right? And they always say that there'll never be peace in the Middle East unless you solve the water problem, right? So Israel, they were under threat. They had to innovate, right? The Dutch, they had to do the same thing, right? Because they're underwater. Singapore, they basically have no water. Literally, it's an island with virtually no water. And I think like 98, 99% of all of their water actually comes from Malaysia, and they have to pump it all in, right? So it's just kind of a story of humanity, right? Where you don't act unless you're threatened. And we're here in Detroit, and we get it all the time. We've got plenty of water, right? Water's everywhere. Why do we worry about water, right? Because we've always taken it for granted, and we're not treating it as an asset, right? We treat it as a liability and just take it for granted. And that's where the opportunity lies. But how do you inspire people to get them to realize that it is an asset? And if we keep taking it for granted for too long, right? It doesn't matter if you have water if it's poisoned, right? People don't realize, you know what took down the Roman Empire? Lead in the water. Flint happened in Rome. That's what took down the Roman Empire. There's a professor out of Florida State University who did isotopic research on the lead in the teeth of the Romans, and he could track exactly when the beginning of the decline and the fall of the Roman Empire based upon the lead isotopes in the teeth and how much lead was in there. Because the aqueducts, they were all lead lined, right? So, so how do we get humanity and society to create that shift in thinking and inspire them to appreciate our greatest asset, which is water?
So you said that Detroit is quite behind. So can you elaborate on that a little bit in terms of what you see in terms of the water innovation, the blue economy space in Southeast Michigan?
I think there's a lot of people doing a lot of really good work in regards to the blue economy space, right? There's a lot of thought leaders, but that support and that importance for the blue economy, or even understanding what the blue economy is. I've had people say, oh, we've got plenty of water. We don't need to bottle it and sell it. That's not the blue economy, right? So it's about education, and the leaders here in Detroit and the leaders here in Michigan, right, need to make it a priority. And it sounds that the governor, the new governor, is going to make it a priority. And as you can imagine, with everything that happened in Flint, I think anything that was associated with water, there might not want it to be a direct association with. So they didn't grasp it as the greatest opportunity. And what have we been? We've been a one-trick pony for 100 years, right? What are we? Automobile, 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 right? That's our bread and butter, right? But everybody knows as the economy goes, the auto industry goes, and the auto industry goes, the economy goes. How do we diversify our economy so it's not solely based on the auto sector? Though it's what brought me here today. My dad worked at a factory, Ford Motor Company, and my mom cleaned teeth. So I love the auto industry. But Bill Ford once said, we're not in the auto business, we're in the water business. We know how to make cars. We don't know how to make water. And you can't make a car without water. So think of it as a threat. How big of a threat it is for companies like Ford in India who are building cars there. What if they run out of water? What is the threat to the market in their manufacturing, right? What is the threat, and how do we put a value on it? What if we're a beer company in California, right? And our business is bottling water and we run out of water, right? What kind of risk is that, right? All companies have water-related risk. One of the world's leading water experts brought the 10 top CEOs of the 10 largest water-consuming companies in the world, and they said, what is your biggest problem? And they all said something different. Logistics, oil, currency. And within 30 minutes, he had all 10 CEOs saying water. You don't have oil without water. It's not the oil business. It's actually the water business where the byproduct is oil. 8 barrels of water to make 1 barrel of oil, right? You talk about cars, you're talking tens of thousands of gallons of water, right? All of these things, and what people don't understand, jeans, steak, right? They all consume mass amounts of water. So how do we start properly valuing that? And until you value something, right, how can you appreciate it or respect it? Because currently, today, in Michigan, nobody pays for water. Not one person pays for water in the state of Michigan. What do they pay for? Permitting, transportation, cleaning. But the water itself, zero value. So how are we supposed to appreciate something that has no cost to it?
Okay.